Hello, this is Ex Nihilo, and I am currently bringing you through the process of making a boffer weapon or a padded weapon for live-action roleplay games. In my last video, I showed how to create a laminated blank for a boffer weapon, and in this video we're going to learn how to trim this to shape. So the first thing that we want to look at and remember is that our core ends right about there. Okay? And of course, it runs down the inside of our blade, like so. Using this visual reference will keep you from making mistakes in the future. Now that we have this reference, I oftentimes will trim the access off to my 2.5-inch size. Just even everything up. Particularity is not necessary at this point. So, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a line running just inside of our core line, going all the way down. This, again, is a general guideline. We're going to do most of our carving later on and neatening up. Just want to get off the larger amount of our form. Now, we have an old kitchen knife, semi-straight blade, and an old rough sharpening stone. Put a few serrations on there, and it's going to cut better than one of these. The reason for that is you have a thin blade versus a wide blade. Your wide blade will keep you true because you're going to be using the back edge of the blade in order to keep you going straight, and you're going to be using the serrations to cut like a saw rather than a sharp razor blade to cut by force. I already have lines on this side. I have my seams. So I am going to be following this line here. On this side, I'm going to be following this line. So if I put my knife at an angle, I am looking at two different lines at the same time. As I draw back and forth, I can make sure that I stay on both of those lines. Allow your blade to make the cut, and allow the back section of your blade to lay flat against your foam. This will keep you generally true for this rough cut process. Now there are other ways to make these cuts. I like to use a table saw, but this tutorial is for anybody. I do not want this tutorial to be for somebody who has special tools. All of these tools that you see me using can easily be found around the house or with minimal effort to find them. Again, I'm following both of the lines and keeping an eye on both of the lines. I am not trying to cut the foam. See, if I push that, I am sawing back and forth with my semi-serrated kitchen knife. I'm cutting towards myself, which is generally not a good idea if you are using force, but I am not using force coming directly towards me. I'm using a sawing motion, and so therefore I am not putting pressure towards my hand. One last one. Let's say I get off of the line and I come this way. Instead of trying to cut into it, lay the flat of your knife and just go back and forth. Allow that edge to cut in and you'll soon be well on your track. Now, to the opposite, if I wander into my line, now I've cut into my foam. Cut that off and start from your opposite side until you've come down to both of your lines. Go the opposite direction and cut off, leaving your tab of foam that you did not mean to cut into. You can later contact cement that back into place and it will be just fine to continue your weapon. Now what we have is we have a rough blank that is cut out with semi-edge and no tip. What I want to imagine on my tip is my core coming in here like so, and I want to have at least 5/8 of an inch on my two diagonals off of that core. The more foam you have away from your core, the safer a weapon it will be. So on these edges, I want to keep as much possible. So if I cut this weapon like so, and my core is here, I am not going to have enough foam to keep my weapon safe. Instead, I want to cut it back out in here. Now this weapon will not have a squishy tip. Some systems require a squishy tip. I'll cover that in a later video. You can put a squishy tip on a weapon. It's best to build a weapon that does not rely on the squishy tip in order to make it safe, and then add the squishy tip later on. So, using this concept, I do not want the tip longer than 1 inch away from the tip of my foam, because the sword will bend over and the core will come out. So I've already laid it to be 1 inch away from the tip of my foam. Do not want a rapier or pointed type of blade. I want a gradual point on my blade. You can always cut off more. That is always better. I'm going to lay my guidelines, even on my tip. Lay my guidelines so that I can follow them. You can go ahead and try to eyeball this if you want, but you're going to be making more mistakes. Now, I still have plenty of tip. I cannot feel the core, and we're going to be addressing feeling the core in on both of these sides in a moment. But now, the blank is beginning to look a lot more like a sword. $60 to $80 grit sandpaper, depending on what you want. You can finish this quite a bit just with that. If I had dug that in deeper, we would have had to contact cement that, let it dry. But we did not. Let's not jam that into our hand. You now have a semi-finished sword blade. However, not finished. What we have is a tip that most people would consider finished. But because we have only laminated with 3 layers, we need to add some extra protection on our tip. I like to call this a combat tip, and again, we're going to be using blue foam. Essentially, it is just another layer. You see that? We're going to be contact cementing this to the edge of our weapon so that there is more protection between the tip of our core. But first, silicone, caulking. Remember that square hole? Let's fill that up. What this does is this makes for a flexible plug. Not only does it protect, it goes down into the core that we have here and adheres the tip of our weapon to our core better, but it also provides a flexible buffer for when the tip of our weapon gets bent over. It will flex, and instead of the core coming out the side, it will give a little bit of resistance. I've seen people do this with hot glue. Hot glue will crack. Okay, I've seen people put tape around the tips of their weapon and then fill it with hot glue. There's a couple of problems I have with that. Number one, fiberglass weakens when you heat it up too much, and hot glue is hot. So you are damaging the constitution of your core when you do that. Might not be a big issue in the tip, but it's still happening. So that's completely full, and we're going to wait for that to dry. I'm going to go ahead and prep these pieces. Again, we do not want a lot of contact cement on there, just enough. Okay, have these set aside, and I'll be back.